Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sharing the Road Safely, Cyclists, Pedestrians, and Drivers. I'm Mary McGuire, Director of Public and Government Affairs at AAA Northeast, and I'd like to welcome you to a discussion of how we can promote better communication and collaboration between all road users in the interest of public safety. We're finally enjoying some warmer weather here in Massachusetts, I think, and that means more of us will be biking, walking, and driving for work and for fun. May is National Bike Month, and if you love to walk, run, or ride a bike as much as I do, you're always thinking about staying safe on the road, especially with cyclist and pedestrian deaths and injuries on the rise here in the US, and speeding drivers a persistent problem. With us today to talk about how education, awareness, and engineering can play an important role in enhancing safety for all road users are three experts who are all avid cyclists, by the way. Galen Mook, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition for 4 years now, who rides just about everywhere, I think, and worked at Landry's Bicycles for many years in marketing and advocacy. Welcome. Bonnie Poland, State Safety Engineer at MassDOT, who for many years rode 10 miles to work from Newton to Boston every single day. She's been with MassDOT since 2004 and is the driving force behind the Impact Crash Portal. And Ron Esposito, a retired police lieutenant, AAA Public Affairs Associate, and league cycling instructor with the League of American Cyclists, as well as a certified bike safety instructor who rides for fun and exercise with his wife. I will say that historically high gasoline prices that we are experiencing right now, it is a very good time to ride a bike. So welcome to all of you. And before we get started, I'd like to invite our audience and any members of the media who are with us this morning to type any questions into our live chat during the broadcast, and we'll address those questions after our speakers present. So Galen, let's begin with you. Why are we seeing the numbers of cyclists and pedestrians being struck on our roadways on the rise, and how can cyclists and walkers proactively protect themselves? What do you see as the most important issues at play here, Galen?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And thanks, AAA, for having this wonderful conversation to talk about how we're all in this together. Just a quick note, though, I do like to ride wherever possible because I work statewide. I drive all over this state as well. So I am very cognizant and aware of how I approach the roads from all sides here. So, but to answer the quick question, I think what we're seeing in the rise in cyclists is a lot of it to do with how we're responding to the pandemic. And not just individually, but as a society, in our infrastructure and our conversations and how we are actually interacting with each other on our streets, roads, and pathways. I can go through my presentation now, or we can pause. I'm happy to take a direction of where to go from here. But the biggest thing I think we're seeing is that people are really understanding that we are reframing how we go about our day-to-day. And the idea of adding in a bicycle trip for health or wellness, obviously for getting out of the house and creating an outdoor socially distanced interaction, but also we're finding people who are not necessarily commuting in the same patterns as they used to. So they're kind of breaking up their day. And we have a lot of data in from MassDOT that shows that most car trips are under 3 miles, and 80% can be under 5 miles. So if you think about how to replace some of these trips, I think people are actually kind of rethinking, oh, well, maybe I can leave my car at home because I really do need to get out more, really do need to get spaced from other folks based on social distancing. And they're not necessarily cooped up as they used to be in the same commuting and work habits as we once had, prior to 2020.
That's a great suggestion, Gail, and I know I often ride for errands around town, same kind of thing, because it's usually a couple of miles, and so I'll ride to the drugstore or the grocery store, whatever. But please go ahead with your presentation.
Cool. I'll be very brief here because I know we have a lot of experts on the field. So Mass Bike, just to take a step back, we are the statewide bicycling advocacy organization. We're a nonprofit, a 501c3 that advocates for better biking for all people. And we do it through really the vision of the ease of bicycling advocacy. I could spend pretty much my entire career boiling down what these E's are, but the ones I'll focus on today essentially would be the encouragement aspect, the education aspect, and slightly the enforcement aspect. And of course, all of these E's should be viewed through the E of equity. And all of these are transforming and modifying and evolving as we go about. I just kind of want to lay the landscape of where Mass Bike approaches bike advocacy. So what we're seeing with the rates of cycling increase, so next slide, please, Mark. The idea of why people are riding more, and I'm missing a slide here, but my apologies, but the graph that would be popping up here is the Westfield Rail Trail marker of, there it is, just coming along. What we're seeing in data on recreational trails is that it's over 100% increase year over year. And we're seeing that during the pandemic, and granted, this data is even about a year and a half to 2 years old at this point, but we're seeing from 2019 to 2020, this is out in Westfield, Mass, just a little bit west of Springfield. So not even a very heavy commuter core, but we're seeing a high uptick in ridership, and this is just a trail counter. And anybody who's been trying to buy a bike in the past couple of years has also understood that we are in a bike boom, which is infecting the shops and sales. It's not just from the shipping containers or the pipeline of parts that are trapped overseas, but it really is everybody is doing their best to try to get a bike, get a new bike, so that they can kind of reignite their love and their joy of riding. And that's been great. And we've also seen the response to that. So in my next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure responses that we've been seeing. And I'll kind of leave it to Bonnie to talk a little bit about what Mass DOT has been able to respond to here. But just want to put some context in that we're seeing both long-term changes in terms of street redesigns, repavements, new curbs. This photo on the left here is in the city of Boston, where there's a nice green painted line, curb level, fully separated from a parking lane, fully separated from the travel lane. And then an example on the right, which is the Shared Streets and Spaces program from Mass DOT, which encouraged municipalities to rethink how we are using our public space, slow down traffic, and encourage people to get out. And one, get out and spaced, because sidewalks, as we know, are too narrow to be 6 feet apart, and bike lanes themselves are the same. But we also noticed that there was an uptick in speeding and not necessarily the fatal crash rates, but we were seeing the amount of crashes and the severity of crashes going up. And we can attribute that to just the more open roads meant for the more ability for drivers to speed. That's the assumption that Mass Bike was drawing. So we were really encouraged that Mass DOT and municipalities were able to move forward with quick build, temporary, but we'll see how long temporary lasts, modifications of neighborhood ways, business districts. And if you live in Massachusetts, you've probably seen a few of these where sidewalk cafes have been able to move out into parking areas, and we've been able to slow down speeds in basically the core of the neighborhoods to encourage people to get out of their homes and really back out in society. Next slide, please. And a lot of this is actually based on the philosophy of Vision Zero, which is that all fatal crashes, all serious crashes in all modes are preventable. And it's a kind of a framework shift that we're trying to encourage here, where we should not accept the idea that it's okay to have just a few crashes out there. And when you hear in the morning news, oh, another rollover on 128, that should not be an accepted, just common occurrence in our society. So what Mass Bike and our partners at the Vision Zero Coalition on the advocacy side, but also the US DOT and Mass DOT really are forming what is being referred to as the safe systems approach. And I stole these slides from the US DOT. Sorry for not throwing attribution on here, but the idea that it's a shared responsibility from engineers to educators to enforcement to everybody is in this together. But also that, we will make mistakes as humans. It's just human nature. And we should make sure that when those mistakes happen, that the ability to have such severe crashes, whether it's for vulnerable users like a cyclist or a pedestrian, or even a person driving a car, it should not afford the severity of crash that would lead to a fatal collision. So this is the mindset that is kind of trying to be set here and how we're talking about how to share our public space safely. So what are we doing about it? A few things that Mass Bike is up to. Along with our partners, we do nothing in a vacuum. I lean on the coalition nature of the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition. But in my next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing outreach to cyclists. And again, this is a whole career's worth of a presentation I'm trying to give here, so I'll try to boil it down. But a couple things that we do, and Ron can speak a little bit to what the league certification is from the League of American Bicyclists, to train up instructors to basically go out and teach safe cycling. So this is an example here on the top right of us in Lawrence at the Lawrence Ciclovia, shut down the roads to teach safe biking. You can see it's both for youth and adults, but Mass Bike certified instructors and league certified instructors are out there to kind of teach the basics of hand signals, how to think of people when they're driving and when they're biking and when they're walking, of being in a shared traffic space. We're also out there directly interacting with individual cyclists. And the left-hand photo here is what we call the Lights Brigade, where Mass Bike volunteers fan out across the Commonwealth and we hand out lights to cyclists who are riding without lights at night. This is just one example of where we're trying to engage directly in a peer-to-peer conversation with a rider, not to scold them and say, hey, you should be riding, you know it's against the law, if not, it's against the law, but rather give them the tool, literally hand them the lights, help them put the lights on so that they are instantly safer, instantly mitigating the crash. And one thing to note with the Lights Brigade program, which might be a little bit different than some of the injury prevention conversations that can come with this, is that we're actually trying to prevent the crash, not necessarily just prevent the injury. And so if we lead with how do we mitigate the crash, we're actually mitigating a lot of the other societal concerns that come with traffic safety. We might need law enforcement to respond to a crash or respond to speeding, but if we design our system that prevents that in the first place, then we can lessen our need to rely on some of the responses and the injury prevention. So this is where Mass Bike likes to have that framework of where can we get ahead of it to kind of stop the dangerous activity before it starts. And we don't want to scold, we don't want to victim blame. So really the Lights Brigade is my favorite because we're honestly just handing out lights. Now this is tough. I always like to remind myself that I can't pump every tire out there, but we can help build the tools and the framework that hopefully can then fan out from the advocacy perspective. Also, Mass Bike, on the next slide, we'll mention how we're reaching out to drivers. These are just a few examples as well as where we're trying to influence some of the driver behavior. Again, kind of leaning in the education E. On the left column, it's a kind of an example of a partnership that we did with the city of Pittsfield. This was kind of a bookmark size, a share the road, very basic. One half of the flyer is about cyclist rules and responsibilities, and the other half is about drivers and how to deal with the infrastructure. And this was in response to a new parking protected bike lane that the city of Pittsfield out in Western Mass was putting in, and it was their first bike lane, so there was a little bit of pushback, a little bit of education. And the right-hand side images are where Mass Bike has worked in partnership with the MBTA system to build up the the operator training, I should say. All bus operators have to go through a day-long training about how to drive around cyclists, how to drive around the new bike lanes. And we realized that the prior training was finalized in 2008. And just for context, City of Boston got its first bike lane in 2008. So we found that the instructor training of all MBTA drivers was woefully out of date. So we partnered with the T, partnered with Livable Streets Alliance to rebuild some of that instructor training, new videos, new PowerPoint presentations. I went out and fanned out to all the MBTA garages to talk to bus operators. And what I learned from this is having a captive audience is key. Finding places where you are kind of encouraged to get drivers where they are, but also have that two-way conversation. Because what I learned from an advocate's perspective is when I sat down and actually talked to the operators, I learned a lot about how to message to my fellow bike riders how to ride around buses, because we would ask the operators, what are some of the biggest problems that you see cyclists doing out there, and then how can we help mitigate that? So it really is kind of a two-way street, to just use that pun, about how we're all in this together. And Mass Bike actually provides that connective role, that sinew to connect, because we have that ability to kind of reach where either the cyclists are or the drivers are. Just two more slides and I'll pass it back to you here. Another great one that I like to mention is the Safe Routes to Schools program, very briefly. This is an example of a backpack flyer. So Safe Routes to Schools, it's in the public school system. It's a Mass DOT program. Mass Bike is a subcontractor of it. We work in the programmatic side of Safe Routes, but we were able to last year create a driver-specific flyer, which is interesting because this program is for elementary schoolers. But the idea was, can we create an asset that actually goes home with the youth up to the parent or guardian so that we're messaging up with the education? And so this is just a brief example of where we were able to find, again, that captive audience. And where's the most impactful message come from? Honestly, if you have a kid next to you in the car and they tell you to put your phone down, or they tell you to stop speeding, or they tell you to put on your seatbelt, or they tell you to use your turn signal, chances are that's a lot more effective than having a police officer needing to say those same things to you. So the idea here is, where can we find the lowest friction to get the messaging up to the drivers themselves. And utilizing the Safe Routes to Schools program in partnership with Mass DOT, we were able to kind of create this wonderful asset. And also, this was just because it's a statewide program, a lot of places don't necessarily have cycling infrastructure. So this was also an opportunity to teach drivers about some of the new stuff they might be seeing out there on the roads and pathways. And lastly, my last slide, I will lean into the legislation side of what Mass Bike's work is. And I just specifically want to call out this one bill. So this bill, it's designed to reduce traffic fatalities, not just for cyclists or pedestrians or people who are vulnerable, but really kind of in the system-wide. And this is an omnibus bill that has passed the Senate, and we're kind of pushing it in the House as well, but your help out there will be essential. And from an advocate's perspective, it is tough to get legislation moving, but this one bill has a lot of support because it really hits the 3-foot passing for vulnerable road users, and that includes state troopers, construction workers, anybody on the side of the road, along with cyclists and pedestrians. And we do not have a designated 3-foot rule in the states. That's something we need to work on. It requires side guards on trucks that are leased or owned and operated by the Commonwealth. This is an example of the city of Boston already doing that with their fleet of public works. And the idea there is that if a turning truck driver strikes a vulnerable road user, this will prevent the rear wheels from rolling over that person. And we know that in urban settings, at least, that is the high majority of fatal crashes for cyclists out there, because that right-hand side of the road is one of the most vulnerable places in the instance of a turning truck. It allows for lowering of speed limits, which we know need to be matched with design considerations. But just as an example of an omnibus bill that we're trying to pursue here. And I do want to call this one specifically out. Mass Bike does have a slate of legislation that we're pursuing, everything from electric bikes to automated enforcement, which we can mention later if that wants to be part of the conversation as well. But this one I feel will do the most in terms of, one, requirements infrastructure-wise with side guards, but also facilitating the education so that we can really message to all the driving schools, all the RMVs, all the motorists out there, as well as the vulnerable users who are out there, stadies, construction workers, et cetera, tow truck drivers, about how we're really looking out for those who are most vulnerable out there on the roads. So with that, I know it's a packed presentation I threw at you there, Mary and crew. So just some of the examples of how we're thinking about the collaborative nature of how we're working together to share the roads. But the reminder that it is coming down to the people first nature of things. And I think a lot of the slides that I've pointed to here too is trying to remove the concept of it's not a car and a bike that are interacting. It's a person operating the car, a person driving the car, a person riding the bike. So how can we reach the person? How can we reach the humanity of it? And that's something that we always like to lead with Mass Bike. So again, apologies for making this so packed full, but I will throw it back to you and stick around for the Q&A.
Not at all, Galen. Great presentation with a lot of really good information. And I should mention that we did invite our friends at Walk Boston to be part of the conversation today, and they had conflicts. So really trying to represent the pedestrian point of view here as well today. And thanks for doing that in your presentation. Really quick question. That flyer looks terrific. How can people access that?
Oh, great question. We have it as a PDF, but this was actually printed through the city of Pittsfield. So if you're a Pittsfield resident, chances are through excise tax, this got sent to your mail. And we were also flyering them out there. This was a municipal collaboration, but that said, what I'll do, Mary, is I can send this, I'll clear it with the city. I'm sure it won't be a problem, but I'll send the PDF your way and so we can share it widely.
That would be wonderful. So thanks for doing that. We appreciate it. And let's move on now to Ron. So Ron, you're also an experienced cyclist and certified instructor. In addition to spending 25 years as a police officer in New Jersey, what's your best advice for cyclists and pedestrians to stay safe?
Well, the key, thanks, Mary, for putting this all together. The key is, and Galen touched on it, is that we have to share the road. The road is a public entity created by the people of the government for the people in our communities, and we must share it. And there's many different types of road users. We have people walking, we have animals, horses, maybe not in urban settings, but there are goat herders and cattle people that move cattle from one field to another and use the roadway. So the roadway is to be shared by all. And the key, and again, great presentation, The key is that we must share the road and share it so that each individual user, a motorist, a bicyclist, a pedestrian, can do so safely without being imperiled the entire time that they're using that roadway. So quick traffic includes everybody and anything that is legally allowed to use the roadway. Traffic started many years ago with humans walking and creating pathways. And then we domesticated animals and we started using animals like camels and horses and then used animals to draw buggies or carriages or carts. And then the bicyclists came. And believe it or not, the first improvements that were made to these mostly dirt roads were for bicyclists, because the bicyclists would get caught in the ruts and or the choppiness of the roads from the animals. So the first roadways that were improved for bicyclists. And then later on, turn of the century, the automobile was created and the bicyclists were kind of pushed off the road. So the funny thing is post World War II, we became a country that said we need to be bigger and better roads, and we have to be able to get to one place from another fast, efficiently. And that's when our fatalities started to skyrocket. In the 60s, we were losing 55,000 people a year on our roadways. And then think of the population back then was so limited. So we had streets that were built with vehicles first, trucks and buses second, and other modes of transportations third, fourth, and fifth. And the last two on the list were bicyclists and pedestrians. Well, now we have a thing called complete streets. And complete streets says that we need to provide the most safety for the most vulnerable. Number one being pedestrians, number two being bicyclists or slow vehicle users like disabled people who have a cart, an electric cart. Also micro transports like electric scooters, power assisted electric bikes, and then up into the mopeds and motorized bikes and motorcycles and that type of thing. And in general, traffic slower stays to the right and traffic faster stays to the left. Now, I know in Massachusetts, it says you should stay to the right as far as practicable, and practicable is the key there. It doesn't mean you have to stay as far right as possible. It means that you have to stay as far right as practicable with taking into consideration the bicyclist safety. Mark, can you run that second video?
Safe, you know what I mean?
It's safe if I'm in the middle of the lane.
Yeah,
if I'm off to the side, that's when I'm not safe.
I'm just saying, to bike recreationally, you couldn't find someplace a little better?
Sorry, do I have a right to be out here?
No, you do.
Thank you. That's all I need.
Okay.
That's all I need. I do this all the time.
Okay. I just want you to be safe doing it.
That's why I'm in the middle of the lane.
Okay. All right. It's your choice.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I chose this video because it was in Weymouth, and it's a place that you probably all know. And secondly, it just kind of depicts the public attitude, and even this guy was a police officer, of bicyclists, that they don't deserve to have the road. And the thing is you're not being safe. And the bicyclist says, oh, yes, I am. And I need to be in the middle of the road because it's a one-lane road. If I stay to the right, it encourages people to try to pass me in that very thin lane. So the bottom line is that bicyclists, when operating for safety purposes, they need to be out a minimum of 3 feet from the curb because of all the debris. They need to be 3 to 5 feet out from parked cars because of dooring. They need to, many times, just for their own safety, be in the middle of the road. Now, as a motorist, a lot of motorists get impatient and they don't believe that the bike should be there, that they should be on the sidewalk or in a bike lane. But you know how many miles in Massachusetts of roadways compared to how many miles have bike lanes. It's very, very, very small amount. So for the bicyclist to be safe, he has to take, or she has to take, the lane, especially coming into an intersection. I myself have stayed on to the right of the road and going straight, and a car came up, was still behind me, but as the light turned green and I went, he went around me and made a right and nearly knocked me off my bike. I had to do an emergency evasive maneuver, but a lot of bicyclists would have just gotten run over. So the bottom line is that we need to share the road. That's kind of the message I want to get out today. Pedestrians are another vulnerable road user. Pedestrians, one of the very most dangerous things is motorists making a right on red. It puts pedestrians in danger because they're looking to the left to see traffic and what's coming. And if you step off a curb and you have the green light, you could take a couple steps and then that motorist sees an opening and boom, goes and strikes a pedestrian. So basically in Massachusetts, if you're at a controlled intersection, if the light is blinking that you have so many seconds left, you can make that decision to enter the roadway. And once you enter that roadway, you're allowed to finish your crossing, and motorists have to be aware of that, even though the light is green for them. If the motorist has to yield to that pedestrian that was already in the roadway. If the figure or the hand is up and it's solid red, you must not cross. And if you do, you could be ticketed, and it is against the law. And in a litigious world, you're the one who's going to be at fault for stepping out into traffic. Not only, and notwithstanding that you're going to be injured and maybe even killed. So the one thing that I want to say is very, very important for pedestrians is that if there is a sidewalk provided, you must use it. If there is no sidewalk provided, which a lot of communities don't have sidewalks in residential areas, you must walk against traffic on the left side of the roadway. This will give you better vision and better ability to avoid conflict. Bicyclists, they stay on the right. A lot of people I know have said, why do I have to stay on the right? I want to see what's coming at me. The problem is bicyclists travel at 10 miles an hour, cars at 25, 35, your crash speed becomes 45, 50. And that is problematic because death starts to occur at 40 miles an hour in crashes. So it's very, very important that we ride with, okay? My closing statement, I want to say, pass a bicyclist, pass a pedestrian as if they were a family member or a close friend, someone that you know. Remember, they're human, they have family, they have friends, they have a life. Treat them with kindness. That's the word, kindness. Let's drive kind. We could create a better atmosphere for all road users if we just drive kind. Thank you, Mary. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ron. Let's drive kind. I couldn't agree with you more. I love that. That should be a slogan that we should all have on our cars, bikes, etc. And thanks for that good advice for pedestrians. Before we move to Bonnie and she shares her expertise, I do want to pose one audience question that we have, which is along the lines of the video that you showed us, Ron. Do police hand out many citations to cyclists? So I don't know the answer to that question myself. So Galen, it looks like you might know the answer. You want to share with us?
That's a really good question. And not to hammer it too hard with the advocacy, but the point of an act to reduce traffic fatalities would actually standardize the reports that all the police departments utilize across the Commonwealth. For those who are in Massachusetts, you know that there are 351 cities and towns, which means there's 351 forms and formats to fill out. So shorter answer is no, we do not have a good database. We have crashes as they're reported. If it's over $100 worth of damage, it does go into the mass.crash portal, and that's been a very effective tool to look to notice incidents, but it's on a municipality by municipality basis. And I would also say that most municipalities, when they do decide to ticket for cyclist infractions, somebody on a bike running a red light or something along those lines, typically it's done in warnings and done in kind of sting operations as a media tool, as an education tool to spread the word. We don't have the police resources to devote towards that, just flat out. And I'm not going to speak for the police, but that's just, you know, Mass Bike's perspective. We should not be depending on police resources for that. So this is when automated enforcement and other ways of kind of removing a police officer interaction might be really beneficial for the road system safety. However, I will say that most cycling infractions of a cyclist needing to get a ticket are a $20 citation. So it's also not even necessarily worth the monetary aspect to go through the judicial system. So for my short answer is it's not an effective tool, in my opinion, in Mass Bike's opinion. And we don't have good data as to when motorists are cited when it involves a cyclist, because some of the crash reports stated as a single car crash or a single car interaction. Some police reports don't even have bicyclist on there, and so they mark it as a pedestrian. So we just don't have the good data.
All right,
I
Galen.
can only add that Mary, excuse me. I can only add that in New Jersey that cyclists are typically not ticketed ever unless they're involved in a crash and they are at fault in that crash. Then the cyclist will receive a summons for violating whatever law they did, passing on the right, running a red light, stop sign, etc. But that's been my experience as a police officer.
Thank you both. Thanks for tackling the question, and thanks to our audience for the question. And let's move now to Bonnie Poland. And Bonnie, what can you tell us about why planning and engineering for complete streets is so important to enhancing safety for all road users?
So thank you, Mary. Thank you, AAA, for having us here. It's been a great discussion, interesting so far. And I'm glad that Galen went first, because there's a lot of things that he mentioned that will save me time and having to mention because he talked about it. And so when he talks about the E's, you know, the 4 E's, the 5 E's, the 6 E's, depending what it is, education, awareness, education, enforcement, engineering, and so on, it's interesting because I was going to bring up a whole bunch of S's suddenly, and it's funny, in my head I'm thinking all these topics I want to talk about. And so let me just run through them quickly so we'll have time for questions. But again, I do appreciate the fact that Galen went first because he saves me a lot of time and I won't repeat what he said. So we are right now in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan stages of developing the plan, the SHSP. And I mention that because it is going to be in the framework of safe system. And what Galen was mentioning earlier, the safe system concept is looking at safe road users, so the people that we talked about, safe roads, safe speeds. So there's that safety, you look at it as a system as a whole, that's why it's a safe system. And so it's done through the emphasis areas, the same emphasis areas that we had last time. And while some of these don't necessarily seem relevant, and some would say trucks, but as was pointed out earlier in the discussion today, is all these are interrelated. All of the E's, the education and the engineering, they're interrelated, as well as the emphasis areas. And so the example that was given earlier is about the conflicts between the bicycles and the trucks turning right is a perfect example of how, when we look at this as a safe system approach, rather than the siloed emphasis areas, we bring them together so that we could either develop legislation with the side guards for trucks, or we can look for other ways to make them safer. And so taking the safe system approach, when we're bringing everyone together, looking at small aspects, breaking down the silos, treating it that inevitable to have some crashes, and we try to minimize the severity of those crashes, is the crux of the matter. And so, as I said earlier, I have a whole bunch of S's to talk about. It was the SHSP, the SAFE system, as you can see here, and you probably recognize this slide because Galen presented this earlier. So we didn't plan this ahead of time, but we have a lot of the same presentation talking points because it exactly is what we're talking here is you have to approach from many different angles, the engineering, the education, the enforcement's a part of it too, EMS, emergency response, that's all a part of this, but taking it through the SAFE system approach. We do not want to accept fatalities, injuries. We really do want to have that goal of 0, and how do we get there? So SAFE system is the way to do it. Now, what I wanted to say is in this matrix here, which might be difficult to see, is how we look at strategies that connect to all of the emphasis areas, bringing them to the SAFE system approach. So that, as we talked about earlier, that might be something that we put with trucks that would help the benefit of the cyclists, as an example. There might be some educational pieces, and I'll just throw this out there that we've put out a whole bunch of messages out there for education because there have been new infrastructure put in place over the past couple of years. And what we found is that the general public doesn't necessarily understand some of the infrastructure that's put in place. And so about a year ago now, we put out videos explaining how to use the HAWK system, a pedestrian hybrid beacon. And it was very interesting seeing the response of people. I'm not a social media user, but it was put out on social media, and the responses that came back were either people didn't know about it, they didn't understand it. And so it was actually really interesting, that connection that we have to bring engineering together with education, training people, educating them what we're doing when we're putting this new infrastructure in place. And so I think that's a really important aspect of it. When we talk about moving forward with the new federal transportation bill that came out, there's a component in there for the safe streets and roads for all. And what that does is it enables grant funds for the states cannot access that funds. That fund is to be accessed by tribal communities, local communities, regional communities, counties, to be able to put some improvements in place. Now, since it's not accessible by the state DOTs, we wanted to do something that we can help the locals to be able to apply for these grants. And so if you're familiar with the impact crash system, it's the crash portal that enables people to pull out data, to be able to use the data to make informed decisions, to understand situations in the problem areas. So we are working, MassDOT is working on a package that all communities would be able to access. They'd simply put in their name of the community and the years of interest, and they'd be able to get reports that would show the top crash locations in their communities by intersection, by bicycle crashes, by pedestrian crashes. It would also show the types of crashes that they're experiencing, why they're occurring, daytime versus nighttime crashes, certain weather conditions that might help with maintenance or snow removal, and understanding these type of crashes. So just by the push of a button, they'd be able to put in their community and get these reports out so they can use this to apply for a grant. Therefore saving the resources for the community to do the work and implement these fixes rather than have to prepare for the grant. So that's something we're excited about. We're going to see a lot more improvements in place for pedestrians and bicyclists because of the vulnerable road user. That's also part of the new legislation that came out, that if states have more than 15% fatalities due to vulnerable road users, they have to spend a certain percentage of 15% of their safety funds on vulnerable road user improvements. And so we're looking for those types of improvements. One of the things that we're excited about is to be able to give materials to communities. So as I said earlier, it's not just MassDOT, it's trying to solve the problem for the state as a whole. And if fatalities and serious injuries are occurring on local roads, let's help the locals. Let's give them the materials they need to be able to make those enhancements on their roads. And so the other piece that brings it all together that ties to safe system is speed management. And how do we write the speeds of the road to make it safe for all road users? And so MassDOT has put out a speed management website. If you just Google search, if you search for MassDOT speed management, it'll come up. And it provides materials of what people can do, what a lay person can do, what a community can do to try and write the speeds of their road to make it safe for all road users. It gives information, it gives action items of what people can do. So please feel free to go to search for Mass DOT speed management, and you'll come up with some interesting tidbits of information and action items. And the last thing I want to mention is the whole social media aspect of it. And again, full disclosure, I do not use social media, but we have some great people at Mass DOT, particularly some of the younger staff who are really interested in social media and they use it regularly, and it's getting that message out. And so one example, I'll just throw this out today, is we're going to be getting some messaging out soon for motorcycle safety. This is also Motorcycle Safety Month, getting some information out for motorcycle safety, because Mass DOT employees, Mass DOT staff, they're riders too. They ride motorcycles, so it hits home for them. And so we have a whole campaign based on the individuals, the people who are the motorcycle riders at Mass DOT, and getting their messages out, both from the perspective of a bicyclist, from a motorcyclist and a driver. And so look forward to those coming out, and then more social media coming out for bicycle and pedestrian too. So I wanted to leave time for questions and answers, so I zipped through everything. But thank you again for having us here.
Hey, Bonnie, thanks for being here, to all three of you. And I have to compliment MassDOT because the Impact Crash Portal is a wonderful tool. And I know Mark, who's behind the scenes on this webinar with me today, and I have used it extensively to do research. I think the idea of providing information to communities so that they can tailor their priorities to the evidence and to the data is just fantastic. And the speed management side, I would say the same thing. And I think an important point for us to make here today is that we have seen speeding on the rise dramatically during the pandemic in Massachusetts and across the country. State police have given a record number of tickets, citations to drivers going in excess of 100 miles an hour. We've done webinars on the topic. And it's so important to remember that, you know, when we're talking about keeping pedestrians and cyclists safe, speed is huge, because a reduction of even 5 miles an hour in speed can mean the difference between life and death for a pedestrian or cyclist or another driver who's struck. So slow down, people. You'll be more fuel efficient too. You'll save money on gas, which everybody's looking to do right now. But those portals, the crash data portal of Impact and the speed management site, both really helpful tools that we're utilizing a lot in the traffic safety community. So let's go to a couple of questions. One thing I do want to ask about, we have an audience question related to helmets, which is that, is it important that your bike helmet be updated? Is an old helmet still safe, or should you be wearing the newest helmet available? So Galen, I know you brought your helmet with you, by the way. So
yeah, I'll tackle this one.
Do some show and tell for us.
Totally, and this is the helmet I bring to my safe routes to schools as well. So my apologies if this comes across like I'm talking to elementary schoolers. But I do like to remind everybody that the most important thing in the universe is your brain. And I won't go into all the reasons why, but let's just keep that in mind. And then this is just a piece of foam, some plastic, and some straps, and it protects the most important thing in the universe. So just keep that in mind. The short answer is that helmets do have a shelf life. I mean, this is just styrofoam. Styrofoam does wear out, especially if you wear it outside. UV light, the wear and tear of just riding around does degrade the styrofoam. Helmets are designed to actually break into pieces. Most helmets are. There are some multiple impact helmets, like skiing helmets and some skater helmets. So most bicycle helmets are actually designed to take the impact and break. Now, if the helmet is compromised, if it's cracked, if it's already kind of got a crack in it or a break in it somewhere, it's not going to do what it needs to do in order to absorb the force, to make sure that force doesn't make its way into your skull. So the short answer is helmets do wear out. I like to say a shelf life of a helmet is about 5 to 7 years if there's not been an impact. And I like to say that I wear a helmet every day, and I've actually never used it. And by that, I mean I've never actually fallen and hit my head, because if I've used my helmet, I need to throw it away and get a new one. So there are two things to keep in mind: the shelf life, and then if it's ever been in an impact. And I'll just demonstrate this one. I like to bring this one as well for my safe routes to schools. This used to be a black helmet that I'd spray painted. You know, put some pink in there, put some gold in there, to show to the kids that, hey, who likes their helmet? Raise your hand. Nobody raises their hand. And I'm like, if you put a sticker on it, if you put a mohawk on it, you're more inclined to wear it. So whatever you need to do to kind of personalize it. I also like to use this helmet because this is the one I usually bring to my ribbon cuttings or my political events. You can see I've had Charlie Baker sign it. I've had Mayor Walsh sign it. And I've also had Tom Menino sign this helmet. So this helmet goes back to the Menino administration. So this helmet is too old. I would not want to wear this helmet and think that it would protect the most important thing in the universe, which again is my brain. So that's a lot thrown into it, but I really appreciate the question about making sure that you're doing whatever you can in the event of a crash, that you're doing whatever you can to prevent the injury to the, again, most important thing in the universe.
Thanks, Galen. You got to get Tom Brady to sign your helmet, and then you can.
That's right, and Mayor Wu and the next governor too. It's a shtick, but it works.
That's right. So Bonnie, we have a question actually from one of our AAA staff members for you, and that is the impact crash portal being utilized in the way in which you envision? Do you find that more people are utilizing the portal and using it to make informed decisions about traffic safety?
So good question. We have we've had this year alone, so in 2020 alone, 2022 alone, we've had over 5,000 users of the system. It is evolving. So 2 years ago, when we went live in August of 2019, we started getting a lot of users, and then we started getting questions about, well, this is all great, I can access it, but is there one quick way that I can just go in and see where the top locations are, the top crash locations, or the top risk locations? So I'll mention risk here. We're talking about bike and ped and even speeding. And so we didn't at the time, but as a result of people asking the questions, we actually went out and built additional modules. So people can now go in at a glance and say, I want to look in this community, I want to look in this region, I want to look in this area, and where are the top risks for pedestrians, bicycle, speeding, crashes, or any of the emphasis areas that were mentioned in the in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And so that's been hugely helpful, because what we're doing moving forward, when we talked about the vulnerable road user category that we have based on the federal transportation bill, that we're going to have to spend money on specifically on certain targets. It's very easy for us now to go in and say, let's focus on these roads and on these issues because it's right in front of our face. And so it's helped us. It's also helped communities. It's helped the regions be able to do it. And interesting enough, it's helped the police departments, because there's also risks in there that relate to, as again, speeding, so it helps them, and impairment and some other things as well. So yes, it is extremely helpful to us, and it also takes the safe system approach, because we're not just looking where crashes have occurred, we're looking where the risks of these serious or fatal crashes are to occur. And so what could be better than taking a proactive approach and addressing some of these issues if we can take a systemic approach on this to address them now before they're actually occurring there. And so yes, it's been extremely helpful for that, and it is moving forward as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I know we often get questions from media about what the most dangerous intersections are, et cetera. So absolutely essential to have that very specific geographic information. So one final question here from our audience, and this is for Ron and Galen, I would say, and Bonnie as well, really, which is that we've seen more and more bike lanes in the Boston metro area in recent years. What advice do you have to help drivers who may be confused by bike lanes, but who want to do the right thing? How can they sort things out, and what are the best suggestions and pieces of advice you can give them for navigating bike lanes? Ron, you want to go first?
Take this one first.
Galen?
Well, the only thing I could say is that there are many different kinds of bike lanes, and just because there is a bike lane, the bicyclist is not required to use it. That's number one, so everybody understands that. The bike lane should be treated as an additional lane of motor vehicle travel, limited to bicyclists, because it's kind of the first come, first serve. If I'm there in that lane and you need to cross over it, you've got to wait till I am not there to cross over. Whether it be a bicyclist, a scooter, or a pedestrian, whatever it may be. So they should treat it like an individual lane, and when changing lanes, most of us put a blinker on. We look over our shoulder, check our mirrors, make sure that there's nothing in our way. And that is really important for a bicyclist because they're harder to see. So you have to actively look for a bicyclist. And when it's a bike lane, it should be acute to the motorist. I have to look to see if there's a bicyclist there. So I have to look extra carefully.
Galen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll second all that with Ron too. It's a lot of it is it's tough because honestly, almost on a daily basis, the infrastructure is changing out there. And it's not just bike lanes. We're seeing bus lanes come in. We're seeing new types of crosswalks. Bonnie mentioned the hawk signal, which arguably I'm still confused with. It's like and there's most people are trained when they take the driving test when they're 15 and 16, and they don't then go back and have another opportunity to kind of get re-educated on the changes of the infrastructure. So it is a serious deficiency that we have that we're hoping to tackle, but it's hard because we need to reach everybody. My general rule, because I think Ron mentioned there's so many different types of bike lanes, and again, a reminder that a bike lane, just because it's there, might not be safe for a person on a bike to be in it, because we all know it could be full of debris or potholes or parked cars. So be patient is my first. Slow down, especially in urban settings where you're going to have a lot of other vulnerable road users around. And I think to Bonnie's point and all of our points about slower traffic means safer systems overall, so that even if the crash does occur, it's a low speed crash. So take your time and wait and have patience, I think is like the overall, that could be said for all road users. I think Ron's point of double checking, not just the mirrors, but looking over the shoulder, checking the blind spots would be extra important. And if something is confusing, just proceed slowly. Don't assume that, just because you have a green light that you're going to be able to zip through, because we all know that there are bad bikers, bad drivers, bad behavior out there. So, folks are running red lights in all modes. So just because the infrastructure is saying that you have a green or a clear, always, always, always triple check, because we are in a real world situation. Now that said, I think part of it too is on organizations like MassBike, our partner organizations, the Vision Zero Coalition, departments like MassDOT, to make sure that the messaging and education is as far and wide as possible. So part of that is, right now is Bay State Bike Month, hence why I'm on my t-shirt. It's May. It's a good opportunity to remind folks about the tips and tricks around biking. Yes, to encourage people to ride, but also to get into the mindset of all road users that, people will be out. There will be a lot of riders out there, and especially if you live in Boston, you see the uptick in the spring and definitely in the fall when the students come back, of a lot of novice riders who, the bikers might not even really realize how to use the bike lanes themselves. So really, it just comes down to being patient, being aware, and being present. And that is just extra, extra important as we're talking about putting your phone down, not getting distracted from the screens that are in the car, just really, really paying attention and triple checking. I know it's very generic, but it's still true.
I think those are right on. I think those are right on. And I would add one thing, which is just to expand upon what was said about, we understand there's bad behavior out there. We understand that. We understand that people do get distracted. We understand that people speed. And certainly that's something that needs to be dealt with. But I do think that there are situations where people just don't understand. Like Galen admitted, he said it's not clear to him how to use a pedestrian hybrid beacon. And so it is upon us when new infrastructure is coming out and we're putting new infrastructure, whether we're doing it, whether a community's doing it, but we need to educate the community. And yes, I think the Registry of Motor Vehicles does a great job updating their manual so that new drivers or new road users who read it will understand that. But for those of us who've had our license for a while, we don't go back and read the manual. And so it is upon us to find ways to reach the public and to reach people to get it out there. And that's come about again and again and again in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan from almost every emphasis area, saying, how do we get the message out? And so those are definitely things that we're going to be looking forward to in the future, of getting messages out to educate people on new infrastructure. So.
All great points. So we just have a few minutes left. I want to throw out one final question before we close, which is distraction a problem for all road users? And I ask that in light of the fact that we see a lot of people with earbuds in. I know when I ride my bike, I never wear earbuds because I rely on my ears to hear oncoming cars, for example. We see a lot of people, a lot of drivers distracted by phones, apps in their car, infotainment systems in the car. I see pedestrians who are walking, looking at their phones, not looking where they're going. So is this something that's incumbent upon all road users to be vigilant about when it comes to distraction? Ron, I'll throw it to you first.
Thanks, Mary. I 100%. I think that the bottom line is, when we're talking about sharing the road, we all have to be respectful to each other, whether it's the pedestrian to the motorist to the pedestrian, the bicyclist to the pedestrian, and so on and so on. If you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, and you do something that causes a motorist to hit you and, God forbid, kill you, that motorist has to live with that for the rest of their life. And the thing is that 94%, according to Google, of crashes are avoidable because they're due to human error. And then the percentages break down, but a large percentage of that is inattention and distraction. So absolutely, it's incumbent upon every road user to make sure that they are focusing on what they're doing.
Thanks, Ron. Bonnie?
I couldn't agree more. I think we've all seen it. We've seen people. I used to ride my bike when I went into the office, and I'd leave my house at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was dark many days, and I still remember this embedded in my head, a person riding a bike in front of me. It was pitch black outside, watching a movie with their phone on their handlebars. But you know what? You see that on riders, you see that with pedestrians walking, you see that drivers reading the newspapers. People are distracted, and anything we could do to change that behavior, change it from ourselves, change it to our friends, our family, and others, it's imperative. We have to do that, and continue to look for ways to do that.
Focus on the road. Galen, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I definitely concur with all of this. I mean, the challenge is it's just getting harder and harder because we're getting more and more distracted, and technology is becoming more and more invasive, I'll call it. We're designing cars with infotainment systems. We're able to have, basically, like you're saying, you basically have your own little portable movie screen right here. So if I'm riding my bike, I can easily pull it out and just start getting distracted. You know, it's something I haven't wrapped my head around fully either, because, you know, we just passed in 2019 with all of our support the hands-free law in Massachusetts. But we also see that it's still, even though we passed a law, it doesn't solve the problem. So what can we really do to really message to everybody out there that this is real? I like to say that biking, just to narrow to one mode, biking is a very zen activity. It includes all 5 or 6 or 7 of your senses all at once. And one of the most important senses to keep in mind, especially since you mentioned earbuds, is knowing what's coming behind you. Your ears are the best things to tell you how traffic approaching is going to be close, speed, and all of that. So the idea that why would you want to cut off one of your most important senses with headphones? It's really challenging, but of course, in my classes, especially in elementary schoolers, we're trying to message to students who might not necessarily have the experience. And so it's a tough one. I don't have an answer for you, Mary, but I know that this is something that is incumbent on all of us, on all road users. And I do want to mention too, though, to the drivers out there, of course, I drive all over as well. You know, the responsibility is shared for sure out there on everybody, on the engineers, on the all modes. But the dangers aren't necessarily shared. And I feel that that's important to remind everybody that those who have the most capacity to inflict the damage also really need to put themselves in the position of, oh, I have the most responsibility to be safest out there. I do not want to absolve responsibility from the cyclists and pedestrians, but I want to get out of the mindset of one is vulnerable on the roads, and the way that we must feel safe is being boxed in. We are all in this together. Let's get back to the humanity of it. And so let's get out of our screens, let's get out of our earbuds and remind ourselves that we are interacting in a real world, in real time, in the moment. And that is the kind of the Zen nature that we all need to bring back into this world, which arguably in 2022 is really hard because there are so many opportunities to just check out and put yourself in a different time and space. So whatever we can do to ground ourselves, just that's the reminder I want to kind of leave with here.
Excellent.
Completely agree with you about the Zen. And I don't bring my phone with me when I ride because I want to be more Zen. But this has really been a great conversation, and completely agree with you about what you said, Galen, in terms of the humanity of sharing the road. And I think Ron summed it up really well, saying drive kind. Hopefully it will make all of us more vigilant regarding the safety of all road users, whether we're behind the wheel, on a bike, or walking. I often say in interviews that when you're on the road, you should use the same good manners you'd use at a dinner party. You wouldn't cut off others in the buffet line, shove someone out of the way to rush to make sure you're first in line. The same courtesy can and should be applied to using the road. Watch out for others, scan the road, take it slow, let someone else go before you. I think we'd all enjoy using the road a lot more and be far far safer if we applied these simple principles of courtesy and kindness on our roadways each and every day, as Ron mentioned. So a big thank you to our speakers, to all of you, to Mark Shieldrop and Alex Slatke for great slides and their work behind the scenes, and to our audience for some great questions. Here's hoping everyone stays safe out there. For AAA Northeast, I'm Mary McGuire. Thanks for joining us. Watch out for bikes, motorcycles, and pedestrians. And hey, it's a beautiful day, so head out for a bike ride, everyone. Thanks for being with us and have a great day.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Thanks,
you
everyone.
all. You guys did a great